Hey guys, welcome back to Mondays at the Museum. I'm Carrie and I'm here at the Anna Bemis Palmer Museum in York, Nebraska. So today we're going to be talking about the history of Gresham, Nebraska. Basically everything started in like August of 1887 when this pioneer town site company went through and platted everything out. The land itself came from the heirs of Fred Fuller. So Gresham is really interesting in that it hasn't always been called Gresham. Originally it was actually called Poston after George W. Post, who was like the president of the bank and the president of that pioneer town site company. But when they tried to name it that officially, the government basically nixed it because it was too similar to Posen, Nebraska, which was already established. So they changed it to Gresham, and Gresham is named after Walter Quinton Gresham, who was the U.S. Secretary of State for Grover Cleveland. He lived a pretty interesting life. He was a big name in the Civil War. He got wounded in the service, and that was kind of the end of his service. Then he went on to politics, and he was one of the very few people who can say that they served as both a Republican and a Democrat in the cabinet. He actually died while in service, so kind of a sad story there. But so Poston was founded in 1887, and then later it was changed to Gresham in the 1890s. It all started with a railroad, as most of our York County towns seem to have started like that. There were several surveys done, and then when the land was officially picked and platted and the railroad was laid out, then there were 2 daily trains, and I guess this was pretty regular, but unfortunately train service did end in 1942, which I'm finding is actually, they're not the only ones that stopped in the 40s here for York County. Some fun facts about Gresham. So the first paper in all of Gresham was called the Poston Review. This was around 1887, right when the town started. So it was published by S.R. Rhodes, and you could get a yearly subscription for $1.50. You know, total bargain, right? I mean, that was a lot back then, but still. So after that came the Gazette, which you'll see a copy of in our section. That was like 7 years later, and that was published by Hugh McGaffin. In Gresham's history, there were 2 elevators right at the very beginning. There was one on the east and one on the west. And even though the town started in 1887, by the end of 1887, there were several businesses that were already established, including a grocery and boot store, a hardware store, of course the Deers Brothers, which again we'll get to when we get there. There was also a beef hive manufacturing company and a potato chip factory, which I thought was pretty cool. Supposedly, so some of these buildings were actually just moved into town, like relocated. They were already built somewhere else. And there's a whole story in one of the books that was for one of the grocery stores being moved in, that they had to cross this bridge and it had to be like cribbed. It was a whole drama fest, and then they finally get it to where it's supposed to be, and the building is too big. It's a whole thing. There were 4 main churches going back to the beginning of Gresham. It started with Presbyterian, Methodist, United Brethren, and then a Lutheran church. At one point, there was an opera house, a theater, a sporting club, and an American Legion club. They said the first telephone came to Gresham in 1906. The first water system was shortly after in 1908, and then electric lights weren't installed until 1909, and even then it was just in the evenings. They didn't get 24-hour service until 1920. So now I'm going to take you for a tour of the Gresham area of our History of York County display. Okay, so here is the Gresham / Poston area as a whole. We're just going to go left to right. So here is a 2-gallon jug that is something kind of pioneer kitchen-ish. We've also got this wedding dress that belonged to Bertha Graff, and she wore it in her wedding to Orville Keebaugh. They got married February 20th, 1923, and so she was a teacher and Orville was a farmer, and they moved to a farm outside Gresham, and they lived there for several years. Along with the dress came a box of accessories, which is just really cool. So we've got her shoes. We've got this napkin that's got the date on it there. We've also got her wedding booklet, and this has things like the guest book with the dates. There's newspaper clippings, there's flowers, all sorts of stuff pressed into here. We've also got a copy of the Gresham Gazette. So this is from 1968, and I just really like the ad in the corner where it's like, broke again, and then, like, no fur coats for you, basically. Yeah, those canceled checks, they're deadly. Here's a picture of Main Street. If I were to guess, I would say this is probably 1910-ish. You can see the horse and buggies there. We've also got a telephone directory from spring of 1920. We've got a couple of really neat books on the Deers family. So Sylvia Zig just brought these in. So we were originally working with this family history, and she just brought us a new one, and it's so well done. So the Deers family, if you don't know, they were into politics, but they also were merchants and had a lot of different grocery stores. We're thinking like 12 stores throughout Nebraska, and this is really detailed and well put together, so you can see like the marriage certificate, the house, and it breaks down all the different brothers and all the different businesses and stuff. Really cool. Also from the Deers, so this was donated from Kenneth Deers there. So this is actually related to the school district. So you can see here it says souvenir with best wishes. It's got a picture of the teacher there, and then when you open it, it talks about which school district it is. And then when you leaf through it, you can see actually there's a whole list of like her students and everything like that. Also a big shout out to Tom and Carol Miller, who have donated hundreds of items to the museum. This is really neat. So this is Gresham State Bank, and it's a piggy bank. And you can see you can put change there in the top, and yes, it is empty. We also have this map here. It's from the 1911 atlas there, so you can see how Gresham is all plotted out. And then there's a lot of military history in this section here. So this is a World War II uniform, and it belonged to Gerald Burgess. He spent a lot of time living in Gresham, but he enlisted in the Army July 21st, 1944. He was discharged January 27, 1946. He actually passed away pretty recently there in 2006, and he's buried in Texas because they relocated there. But other military items in this section, we have this picture of Henry Lanfear. So he was in the Civil War. So he was born in June of 1842. He passed away in September of 1916. So he was in Company I of the 122nd Illinois Volunteer Infantry. And he was like a super early pioneer of Gresham. So think like 1872. So way before the town itself was established. Other military stuff in this area is linked to Clarkson Doane, who is this guy right here. We also have another picture of him here. So here is a photo of his company. It says the York County Boys, probably, to camp July 22nd, 1918. So there's his unit. We also have this military service certificate that is signed by Samuel McKelvey. And if you know anything about Nebraska history, he was kind of a big governor at the time. We also have this helmet that Clarkson sent to his brother back at home in Gresham via the mail. And we have a Christmas letter as well from 1918. You can see dated there, December 3rd, 1918. Now, unfortunately, Clarkson contracted tuberculosis when he was serving in France, and he did pass away at the age of 34 in 1929. But we have a picture of his casket that's all decked out in the flowers and military gear. So that is the Gresham section of our History of York County display. If you want to come see it in person, you still have a month left. February 28th is our last day, so a little bit less than a month now. Make sure to swing by. We'll see you next week when we talk about the history of McCool Junction.